Well, yesterday, the U.S. government, led by President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, opened the three-day U.S. Africa summit, which is charting the course for the future of U.S. Africa relations. Today's focus will be on increasing two-way trade and investment at the U.S. Africa Business Forum. Founder of the African Presidential Leadership Center, Charles Stith, is attending the event in Washington, D.C., and he joins us now via Zoom. Ambassador Stith, a very good day to you. We know you had to wake up a bit early for this, and we thank you for that. What are the people attending?
Well, Desiree, it is a tad early on this side, but the program is starting early.
That's why we're grateful you woke up.
Gives me a running head start. Now,
Absolutely.
The summit has shaped up extraordinarily well in terms of attendance. There's a record number of African heads of state and government in attendance. In today's business forum, over 200 companies and organizations will be in attendance. And so that's an excellent turnout.
I want to ask you this, though, Ambassador. I want to ask you this just in terms of attendance. What's the conversation that's taking place around the absence of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, actually, surprisingly, that has not been a big topic of conversation at this point. And the thinking is, one, that the U.S. South African bilateral relationship is as strong as it's ever been, and the assumption is if that President Ramaphosa didn't attend the summit, that there are other issues more pressing at home, and at the end of the day, all politics are local. So it has not been a topic of conversation at this point. It'll be interesting, though, to see if it's raised later today at the business forum.
Yeah, quite interesting that you say it hasn't been a point of topic at all. Now, one of the conversations being held at the summit is the push for the African Union to be represented at the G20, which is another event altogether. How is this conversation going?
Well, this is we just finished the first day of the summit, and my sense is that there will be some announcements on the 15th, the day after tomorrow, which will probably bring in the clearer focus whether or not we'll see the AU admitted to the G20. Yeah. It certainly would be an interesting development should that happen.
So day one focused on the vital role of civil society, which is you're also impacted here, and the strength of the African diaspora communities to the U.S. I hear the Africa and Diaspora Young Leaders Forum was very vibrant. What came out of here?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to punctuate that as opposed to previous summits of this sort, that the diaspora was the lead event. This is the first day, which is a recognition that the diaspora does bring something to the table. I mean, you mentioned the fact that I'm the non-executive chair of the African Presidential Leadership Center, but my day job is the executive chairman of the Pula Group, which is a U.S.-based company, and we focus on investing in high-value opportunities on the continent. And we think that countries like ours bring something of significance, both in terms of capital, access to capital, and access to markets that are important to Africa's development and the continent's future. And the fact that that was on the first day of this summit, I think, is noteworthy.
What other important conversations took place? Health, climate change, peace and security are clearly on the agendas of many such gatherings. But what really interested you as you were listening to the different conversations?
I think, look, I think the big opportunity here for the Biden administration, I mean, given what we're doing in terms of PEPFAR, given, the AGOA is in place, it's up for renewal in 2025. I mean, that's an important part of the conversation. I think the two most significant things occurring in this summit. One, as I mentioned earlier, that the conversation about how the diaspora engages and participates in the empowerment, growth, and development of the continent is an important conversation. Secondly, I think what we'll hear in the conversation today in terms of business and business development engaging on the continent is going to be equally critical. As you and I have discussed in the past, Africa is still in recovery as it relates to the impact of COVID on its economies. And aid is going to be important to that recovery. But even more important is how Africa participates more fully in global supply chains that were broken during COVID and showed evidence of creaking and cracking even before COVID. It's a tremendous opportunity for the continent. I met with one gentleman who just shipped a container of cashew nuts, which had been completely processed and packaged in Tanzania. That's huge in terms of the impact that kind of beneficiation can have for Tanzania's growth and development. I in conversations with the gentleman that I'm talking about, his company's called, by the way, Tanzanuts, which is,
Ambassador Stith,
catching. Yes.
I just want to ask you here, as you go into that business event today, it's all important for, international trade to get FDIs and to get the U.S. trading with Africa. But Africa has just implemented its own trading mechanism, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, where it hopes to encourage trade amongst African countries. Is there any cognizance of the importance of this mechanism as the U.S. tries to develop trade with Africa as well?
Well, the short answer to what is an excellent question is yes. When you look at the continent country by country, with the exception of Nigeria, with well over 200 million people, most of the markets on the continent are moderate in size. After Nigeria, the next group of countries include places like South Africa and Tanzania, where you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 million people.
Egypt has a sizable number as well.
Looking at this mechanism of continent-wide trade opportunities, can certainly be a real boon to Africa's growth and development.
But how is this conversation weaving its way into conversations about separating this from trade with the U.S.?
Well, again, I think we'll hear more about that today. President Biden will be addressing that session.
Yeah.
In addition to Secretary Blinken and our Secretary of Commerce. So, we'll have a little bit more meat on that bone later. In addition to the intra-Africa trade and what that means in terms of providing a different kind of market profile for places like the U.S. and the EU, one of the other important things is how Africa participates in this green revolution that's taking place in the energy sector. Right now, we're seeing more done in the way of exploration of fossil fuels on the continent than has been done at any time. But, the governor of California, the state where my company is based, just announced that in 2035, every new car sold in the state of California will have to be either an e-vehicle or a hybrid. So it means that the days of fossil fuels are numbered.
Yeah.
So how Africa begins to position itself for this green transition might be more important than anything else on the agenda for discussion.
Do we know which African presidents have already had the opportunity to have a private conversation with U.S. President Joe Biden?
The short answer is I don't know. I'm sure some set-asides have been done already. I've talked to a couple of the heads of state, whom I'll not mention at this point. I asked that question. They had not met with President Biden at that point. We'll see. One of the other good things, though, while it's important to speak to the president and, chief executive, the chief executive, head of state, the head of state is important. A number of African presidents were up on Capitol Hill today, engaging some of the folks in Congress in conversations. And I think that's equally as important because Congress holds the purse strings. And so it's important to engage congressional leadership. As you know, there's been a change. The Democrats maintain control of the Senate. They lost control of the House. But one of the interesting things is that for the first time in history, an African-American congressman, Hakeem Jeffries, is now the Democratic minority leader. And should the Democrats take over the House in the next election in 2024, Congressman Jeffries will become, in all probability, the Speaker of the House, which is the third most powerful position in Washington.
Yeah.
So that you've got folks who are astute enough to know that while the conversation with the president, the photo op with the president of the United States is important, that when it comes to power and how the rubber meets the road, working with Congress is going to be equally important. So I was really glad to hear that there were a number of conversations taking place on Capitol Hill.
So all these power conversations taking place, but our viewers watching now wondering, in the final analysis, what's the relevance and significance of this gathering?
Well, again, first of all, that it's happened in President Biden's first term, within the first 2 years, is a signal that Africa holds a prominent place. Secretary Blinken has made a number of trips to the continent, including to South Africa. As I understand it, there are a number of other trips by high-level cabinet officials to the continent. The Secretary of the Treasury, I think, is going to be on the continent sometime soon. So it says, this early, this high profile of an event, that the administration is taking Africa seriously. So that's important. One of the things that I've said probably ad nauseum to colleagues on the continent as well as in the United States, that it's important for African leadership to come to the table with more than an appetite. They need to have their own menu of what they want to see happen relative to the relationship continentally and, more important, bilaterally, because at the end of the day, that's where things happen. But the fact that this meeting is taking place this early in the administration, that it's this high profile, is good for Africa. It's also good for the United States. You know, there's a lot going on in the world today. And so as the U.S. positions itself to continue to provide the kind of leadership that's expected to engage Africa in this way is important for the U.S. as well.
It's important what you're saying, Ambassador Stith, about African leaders coming up with their own solutions for the problems in their countries or the world. And you're in a prime position to answer this question because you're in the African, the center that you started, the African Presidential Leadership Center, where you have massive engagement with former and current leaders of Africa. What is Africa bringing to the table?
Well, one, you do still have some of the fastest growing economies in the world on the continent, notwithstanding what happened with COVID and the impact that it had on countries like South Africa.
Yeah.